Okay, I'm on top of the ridge here, as I was saying before. Now, the Army would have marched to this spot right here after that defile. There's a defile down there. It's about 2 football fields in length. Now, they would have came to this area. Now, the Army would be first on this area. The Army would have moved here. They would have stayed here. They wouldn't have gone any further than this until the baggage in the back had come up through that defile. Now, the defile ran from Birmingham Road, where Howe's Army had turned, made a sharp right, and then came through that defile that was unprotected by Washington. Now, they could have had people down there, but they didn't. So they advanced to this position where I'm at right now. Now, the Army came here. It was a hot day on September 11th. It was foggy. They came here, they refreshed themselves, they had to wait for their baggage to come up through that defile. Now, the defile ran about a football field length to about 2 football fields in length. Now, when they came out of the defile in the distance, they came to this position here. Now, this is the high grounds. This is a little bit higher up, where I could see, if I'm on top of a ridge here, I could probably see to Birmingham. I could see to Osborne's Ridge from this area right here, which is about 2 miles away. Now, during this time, the Army would have stationed themselves all around where I'm at right now. There's a historic plaque here that mentions this, that the Army did stop here for the first time on the march. Now, again, about this area, it's historic. It's because the Army stopped here. It was a hot day. They stopped. They refreshed. Like I said, they had to wait for the baggage. Now, there's a story about this area. Now, when Washington was in the area early on, probably around September 3rd or September 4th, he had places where he would take the soldiers to. Some of his sick and wounded that came from Wilmington had to be taken to this area. Now, Birmingham Meeting House, where one of the videos was filmed, was Washington's hospital before the British took it over early on, probably around September 7th. They were using this building. Now, that building was for the Quakers. It was a Quaker local that went there. It was Quaker locals that had worship there. Now, during this time, they were kind of put out. The Quakers, they didn't have a meeting house. They couldn't go anywhere. Washington had taken their meeting house for a hospital. Now, what happened was in this area where I'm at right now, a Jeffrey or a Joseph Townsend, there was a wheelwright shop in this area. Now, a wheelwright shop is a place where wagon wheels were repaired. It could have been a blacksmith. They could have done other things, made things in a wheelwright shop. So they had to have a midweek meeting at a wheelwright shop, probably most likely in this area where I'm standing. Now, during this time, the British were on the march. They were coming up to Jeffreys Ford. Now, there was a meeting going on here. Now, they didn't know that the British were coming across that ford. Now, some of the locals, the Quakers, they kind of went into the meeting and broke up the meeting and said, hey, look, we see the British, they're coming, and they kill everybody in front of them. They were scared. They knew who the British were. They didn't like them. They thought they were going to steal and maybe kill them. So anyway, Joseph Townsend at the time, he wrote a biography in 1847 about the Battle of Brandywine. He followed these people. He knew all about them. So basically, him, his daughters, and a couple of his cousins went through this defile down to Jeffreys Ford. Now, they stayed at Jeffreys Ford. They noticed that the fields were covered with British. There were scarlet uniforms. They saw them coming. Now, they didn't really worry too much. I don't think they were afraid of the British, but they saw them coming. They were in the fields above Jeffreys Ford. Now, again, like I said, that Joseph Townsend, Joseph Townsend, followed the Army. He met up with the Army as they were coming through this defile. He was in this area. He said that he wanted to follow the Army, if that was okay. And an enlisted man said, I think you should go talk to our sergeant. So he must have talked to a guy that was well-dressed on a horse. A lot of these British were meticulous people. They had arm patches, they had gold, and they just looked the part. Now, Quakers during this time were very plain people. They didn't see anything different in this landscape. So when the Army marched through this defile, he was fond of new things, he said. and he followed the army. He was allowed to follow the army. Now, during being a Quaker at this time, you weren't allowed to get involved in a battle. You were peaceful people. You didn't bother anybody. So it was against their customs to do anything that would inflict punishment or death on another person. But he followed the army. And a couple other people that followed the army were curious. They were curious people. Now, they followed the army to this position where they stopped. And most likely, he stood where I'm at, near the wheelwright shop in this area, and he saw Cornwallis go by. He saw Howe go by. He saw the wagons. He saw different people. He saw the Hessians that had large hats. They had metal plates on their hats. They had different uniforms. They looked out of place in this landscape, but they were amazed. They never saw anything like this. You see 9,000 men on the march and about 300 wagons and cannon, you're going to be amazed. So Joseph Townsend followed the army from this position all the way up to Osborne's Ridge. Now, during this time, he has many accounts of things that went on. He knew that the British were on their way. They weren't going to Philadelphia. They thought they were going to Philadelphia, but they weren't. They were going up to meet Washington's army. So anyway, a high-ranking officer goes up to Joseph Townsend and says, "What do you think of Washington?" And Joseph Townsend told him the truth. He said Washington was a very portly man. He was a very nice man. He was courteous. Because a lot of these Quakers knew that Washington was in the area. They must have, Washington asked them for intelligence about the area. Joseph Townsend knew Washington. He was at his headquarters one day. And I guess he told the British that Washington was a very nice man, which he was. So the British commander said, well, Washington might be a nice man, but he shouldn't have taken up arms against our sovereignty. He told him that. But during this time, these armies, they marched. They came to this area, they marched, and some of the Quaker inhabitants would follow them. This was something completely different. He put in his journals that this was something I would probably never see again in my lifetime. So basically, he went up to Osborne's Ridge with the army, which is about 2 miles away. He stood on top of the ridge. He watched the formations of grenadiers. There was all kinds of different companies that came by. They just kept coming by, and they came to Osborne's Ridge, and that's the second stop that they made. They stopped here, and they also stopped over at Osborne's Ridge. Now, during this time, he said that he saw the Americans. They were in a line up at Birmingham. They were coming. They were going to meet the British force. Joseph Townsend said that he heard musketry. They were going. He didn't want to get involved in the battle. He stood on top of Osborne's Ridge, just like Lord Cornwallis and Howe. They stood on top of the ridge. He saw General Howe, and he said that in his memoirs. He said that General Howe was on an English horse. It was much reduced in flesh. Now, these horses made a trip across from New York. They came into the head of Chesapeake. The horses weren't fed very good. They were thin when they got to this march. And he said that General Howe looked like he had no teeth. His teeth were sunken in. And he said that the men looked white. They looked pale, like they were women of high class. He didn't understand because Quakers were farming people. They had tans. They didn't look like the British. The British were well-fed. They were portly, and they were small guys. And they were basically white with powdered wigs. Now, to put it in perspective, they looked out of place. But during the battle on Osborne's Ridge, when the army was going towards Birmingham, Jeffrey Townsend didn't follow the army. He stayed on top of the ridge. Now, after the battle, I think that Townsend watched this. He watched the army fight in the distance about a mile away. He said he saw the American lines break when the British got to the area. The main force pushed the Americans back to the second line. He saw this. He was on top of that ridge and he saw it. So it was getting late in the day. Most likely they were at the third line, the Americans and British. Joseph Townsend and another friend went down. They said, look, we'll never see this again. I want to go see the battlefield. He goes to the battlefield, and it's just a quagmire of dead. He said there was wounded. There were surgeons in the area near Birmingham Meeting House because this was his meeting house. You know, he knew this meeting house very well. Now, the British occupied it. and they used it as a field hospital. They took the doors off the meeting house. They were carrying the officers in first. They were the first being treated, were the officers. Now they weren't allowed to, Quakers were peaceful people. Now he was forced into service by the British at Sabre Point. He said, you gotta help us carry our dead and wounded off the field, which he thought to himself he was starting to help, and he said, this goes against my religion. I'm participating in a battle, but he had no choice. He had to do this. So he saw operations. He saw an operation in Birmingham Meeting House. He saw a guy, he was getting, I guess, an amputation, and he commented about the knife. He commented about the people. He commented about the surgeons, what they looked like. Now, to put into perspective, what this Quaker must have seen, he remembered this. He put it in his memoirs later on in life. Now, his son, Joseph Townsend, he moved to Wilmington, and he had a very large family. I think he had like 12 kids. He was a very respectable man later on in life, and he wrote a book about the Battle of Brandywine and what he saw here. Now, another thing that happened also was that Joseph Townsend's son, he had a son, during probably his death, Joseph Townsend's death, his son took another reporter around the battlefield and showed him this whole area. Now, during the 1850s, or the early 1850s, there wasn't no photography, but they sketched all this area. He has sketches showing Joseph Townsend's son, showing the reporter or the writer around this area. And there's sketches of this whole area and what it looked like. Now behind me, there's this big oak tree here. Now I saw many postcards of the Battle of Brandywine. This oak tree in the background was a marker. It had a marker on it. It was a big white marker. It said this area was occupied by the British. It was occupied by the British. Now this is a historic tree because that postcard dates from 1906. So this tree behind me that had the sign on it still exists today. Now I just want to mention that this is where the British stopped on their march up to Osborne's Ridge, probably around 1 o'clock on the afternoon of September 11th.